Well, thank you, Mr. President, for that very nice introduction for our esteemed panel today. As an energy report for the Wall Street Journal, I have to say it has been a fascinating time to pay attention to energy because North America is suddenly the center of the global energy world. Very much an afterthought only 10 years ago, a major consumer. Now all of a sudden it's becoming a huge producer and exporter of energy. And it's just very interesting, and we're very fortunate to have representatives from the three countries of North America with us today to talk about how that happened, what the role of government has been and should be going forward. It's going to be very, very exciting. So just a quick rundown of what makes North America so interesting right now. Obviously, up in Canada, the giant oil sands, these are Saudi Arabia-sized oil reserves up there, which have become, just in the last few years, huge amounts of development, much of that oil coming down into the United States. Obviously, in the United States, we had the shale revolution, as it's called, and we're sort of fortunate here. We've got the governors of Kansas and Texas, and Kansas was where the world's first hydraulic fracture job was, up in the Hugoton Field in 1947. And then, of course, what really kicked this off in 1997 was a well up north of Fort Worth here in Texas. So we've got the representative of the two states that really, at least on the technological side, helped jumpstart this. And then down in Mexico, where we have a representative today from, they're going through a historic opening, potentially. And really the potential for North America not just to be a major supplier and consumer of energy, but a much more integrated whole. And then what's fascinating is that there has been in North America a huge boom in oil production and natural gas production we've been talking about, and at the same time, renewable energy has grown incredibly quickly. Certainly here in Texas, wind energy has become a major contributor, and in Kansas as well. But the downside of that is that coal and nuclear plants are struggling. The future of both are less than certain. And so all of that raises this question. We're going through a period of tremendous and rapid change in energy. How does government approach this? What is the role of regulation going forward? What should the role be? So let's jump right in. Governor Perry, you are the longest serving governor in Texas history, and I believe currently the longest serving governor in the United States. Your first full month in that office was January 2001. At the time, Texas produced 1.2 million barrels of oil a day and 15.7 billion cubic feet a day. As of this summer, Texas is up to 2.6 million barrels of oil a day, so more than doubling. Gas went from 15.7 BCF to 22.2 billion cubic feet a day. Huge change, and a huge success. I mean, lots of jobs being created, royalties. So I guess my first question is, who deserves credit for that? Was that a triumph of the free market? Does the state deserve credit for that? So what?
Always the loyal trooper, sir. Listen, Amity, the key, I think, to this is that the free market is what deserves the credit for it. George Mitchell, the great pioneering wildcat spirit, Mr. Hunt, that men and women in the oil and gas industry have had for decades. And yes, government can get in the way, as we see the federal government getting in the way of energy development in this country. Fascinating, when people think about Texas, Mr. President, they always say, oh, well, it's easy to be the governor of Texas. I mean, you all are sitting on all those oil and gas reserves. That's a piece of cake. The fact is, our gross state product in 1984 of the mining industry, the oil and gas industry, was about 14%. 14% of our gross state product. Today, it's about 14%. It shows the great diversification that's occurred in this state. But other states could be having the same good fortune as Texas and Kansas and North Dakota and South Dakota. I don't know with complete and absolute accuracy, but my instinct would be that California may be one of the most mineral-rich states in the nation, not just with oil and gas, but also with the rare earth minerals and what have you. But they have, in Sacramento, made decisions to not explore for, not exploit for the good of the citizens of their state. New York is a great example of it. Tom Colbert, who was here yesterday, you cross that line from Pennsylvania into New York, and it is truly like going to two different economies. One, because they've allowed the fracturing of the Marcellus Shale, and the other because they have not. And the economic difference between those two places in the United States are stark. And so I give the credit to certainly the private sector, which is certainly where it should be, but with the assistance of government, not getting in the way. We use smart regulations in this state.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when I talk about, you can over-regulate. I mean, and that's what we've seen, whether it's by the EPA and or in states like California, where they are absolutely over-regulating, where the cost of regulation, where the time and the convolution that occurs. But in our state, we have put good, smart regulations. For instance, the first state in the nation to make public what was in those fracking solutions, so that the public had comfort that there was not compounds that would hurt them and their children, but that those types of procedures were in fact very safe and thoughtful, and our economy is booming because of that. So I think smart regulations, making sure that, Mr. President, during the last decade, we have seen nitrogen oxide levels go down by 28% in this state. We have seen the ozone levels by 58% go down in this state. That's smart regulation. All of that occurring while there was over 1,000 people a day moving into this state and one of the most dynamic economies in the country. So there's a model for how you can use smart regulations. There's a model for how you can incent the private sector to risk their capital, to create wealth, and to, in turn, the jobs that are created. There are men and women in South Texas who 6 years ago may not have had a job, or they had a minimum wage job. Today, they're making over $100,000 a year, and these young men and women are having a conversation at home. They're wanting to know, who is this Mr. FICA? There's some great economics going on is what's happening, some good economic policy being learned as people are enjoying the wealth that's being created, and not just in Texas, but in Kansas.
You know, as I talk to some oil and gas industry executives, I hear some concern that some of the operators, there have certainly been some problems along the way, and they want some form of regulation to make sure that companies do what most companies do anyway, to operate well, not to have spills. Is that a proper role for the government to get involved and to make sure this energy revolution doesn't derail because of some?
Absolutely. It's a role. And again, I think we do it in a very thoughtful, balanced, smart way in this state. When you think about the massive amount of energy that's been discovered in Texas and that will be discovered in Texas, and I would suggest in the Dakotas and in Kansas, and you all have good, thoughtful regulations in your state, but I do believe it needs to be done state by state. Again, get away from the centralized decision-making in Washington, D.C., where one size fits all, and you have to go to a faceless, faraway set of bureaucrats to get your regulations approved. Let the states be more engaged in this. If there are issues that, border issues with pipelines or what have you, the federal government has obviously a role to play. But when it comes to the health and well-being of the citizens of Kansas, I can assure you that Sam Brownback cares more about that than some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. I just know that.
Well, we know more about it, too, about what we need to do versus what takes place in Washington. And I think that's why the country was built on a 50-state model, or a model of states having the general authority and the federal government having the narrower authority that it did.
Well, let's turn to you, Governor Brownback. You served in Washington as a senator, before that as a member of the House of Representatives, then you came back, and now you're governor. in Topeka since 2011. I looked up some of the statistics. This really struck me as remarkable. 21% of electricity generation consumption in Kansas in the first half of this year was from wind power. It was from renewable source of wind power. Coal provided the most of the rest, about 62%. Then you had some nuclear and some natural gas.
It's a windy place.
Apparently. But one of the knocks on renewable energy is that it's too expensive, it needs too many subsidies. But by encouraging or allowing so much growth in wind power, and there's been a tremendous growth in wind power in Kansas, aren't you saddling consumers with higher rates and making Kansas less competitive?
No, and a good portion of it has been, we've got a good wind resource. The technology's been developing well, and then the production tax credit, which a lot of people have a dispute about, buys down the price of the capital investment 30%. So you buy that down, and right now, if any of you want a contract for Kansas wind, you can do so and probably get a 20-year contract for under 3 cents a kilowatt.
See you after the meeting. You can work that out.
I'll put you in touch with the right folks, and we'll sign you up. The wind resource is good. The technology is developing better, and they will offer you a 20 years. So you're actually locking in a nice price for something over 20 years, so you don't have a variability on your price of your electricity.
How attractive is that, to be able to take away some of that risk of not knowing where natural gas prices are going to go, not knowing where coal prices are going to go, but you know what the price is going to be?
I think it's very attractive. And then it's a renewable source, and we're learning how to manage it better, because the wind doesn't blow all the time. It blows a lot, but it doesn't, not all the time. And I think this is really developing nicely. Particularly, you match that up with natural gas, which you can fire those generators up pretty fast. I think we're getting a lot better about being able to do this. And it's kind of funny to me, because my dad grew up on wind electricity. On our little farm in eastern Kansas, that was their first electricity. It was a little windmill that would churn out there and would charge a bunch of batteries in the back porch that Grandma then could run a vacuum sweeper. It wasn't much of one, but it was a vacuum sweeper and a little radio and a little light. They started on wind. It wasn't near as much as we got now.
Vacuum. He
grew
up rich, Mr. President. He had a vacuum.
Well, what kind of government policy, you bring up a really interesting point, which is that renewable energy is intermittent. And unlike your grandparents' farm, we don't have batteries that can effectively commercially store on large-scale power when the wind's not blowing, or in the case of solar, when the sun's not shining. So what type of government regulation, or what's the appropriate role for government to get in there and say, okay, this is how we have to balance it, but we can't have 100% renewables because people don't want their power to go off.
I think this should be. There was an old Senator, Mike Mansfield, for years used to say, "Tap it lightly." And he was talking about in the mining field, you tap it lightly. And I think this is one of those, tap it lightly. I don't think you need a bunch of government regulation. The production tax credit has been essential to get the wind industry up and going. I have advocated for its extension and phasing out over a 4-year time period. Don't just get started and then drop it. Let's phase it out over a 4-year time period. The technology's getting better. What would be probably as useful as anything from the government is helping on getting power lines so the power grid's better interconnected between states on this, because you've got a huge wind resource in the high plains, best in the country by far, and it's going to be tougher for Vermont to do wind electricity, but if you could move it easily, it wouldn't be.
So the role of government here is infrastructure in some way.
I think it's much more and a facilitation of it. I'm not saying do it, but that's the key piece, I think, really for us to be. And I want Kansas to be known not only as the wheat state and a great football state, my Kansas State Wildcats, although we're rebuilding this year. Listen, we didn't get off to the best start we wanted, but also as a renewable state. And I think these are things we do, and do them prudently, so you're not saddling the marketplace with a bunch of higher costs, because we can't do that. We got to grow this economy, and you need good, basic, reliable, and not that expensive electricity to do it, but really more helping with that infrastructure than regulating.
Let's bring in Governor Jim Douglas. You were governor of Vermont 2003 to 2011, served as an elected official there from 1972, I guess, until 2011. Now you're teaching courses at Middlebury College. This was sort of interesting. There's A few years ago, Vermonters opted to pay for a surcharge on power to fund a program that generates energy from cow manure, cow power it's called, which sort of raises an interesting question. Renewable energy has been very popular with the public. Right. If the public wants to pay more for green energy, even if it makes a state less competitive, should they be allowed to do it, or should the state step in?
Well, they do it. You're exactly right. We have the greatest number of methane digesters per capita in America. We use the bovine refuse and turn it into electricity, and it's been very successful. And it's important to Vermonters because the farmscape defines our natural beauty, and we want to preserve it. Dairying is not very profitable. I have a brother-in-law who's a dairy farmer, and he said, I'm going to dump the milk and harvest the manure. And that's where the money is. But we have a program now authorized by our state utility regulators that allows folks to pay 4 cents per kilowatt hour voluntarily that goes directly to the farmer on top of already high electric rates. And thousands have signed up to do it, and I guess it works. But we have other renewables with high feed-in tariffs, and over the last few years, we've become quite uncompetitive. We used to have the lowest electric rates in New England, still high compared to other parts of the country, but we got about a third of our power from a nuclear plant that is going to close next year, the operator just announced, and a third from Hydro-Quebec, our friendly neighbors to the north. Clean portfolio, almost emission-free, and very competitive. Well, what's happened? The shale revolution, and so now those formerly cheap sources of power aren't. And we do have access to natural gas. Northwestern Vermont has some supplied from Canada again, but there's a big opposition to extending the pipeline. A big hearing in my hometown the other night where folks come out by the hundreds to oppose it. So there is this stress, and the impact over the last year and a half has certainly not been favorable. We've lost 4,400 jobs, which is about 1.5% of our workforce in the last year and a half. We're one of only 2 states that lost population last year. The other was Rhode Island. We're the second oldest state by median age because our kids are leaving, going to Texas and places like that. My niece moved to Texas. Well, she fell in love with an Aggie. What can I say? So we've got this.
I can understand that.
I can too.
I knew you would. I knew you would. So we got this stress that we've got higher rates now and an interest in renewables that are a real problem for us. So what's the role of government, you asked?
Well, do you give the people what they want, or do you have to sort of pull it back?
Well, of course, have nothing to do with it now, so I don't want to impose on the folks who are in office. But if I were still there, I would say we got a problem. We've got a hemorrhaging of our economic base, and electricity costs aren't the only factor. We have a pretty high tax burden too, and some other issues. But that's a key, especially for manufacturing, which is still our largest economic sector. So I would suggest that government needs to look at that, try to rebalance. We don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. Hydro-Quebec would sell us 100% of our power if they have it, but some diversification is important too.
Well, I wanted to get at that point because you want to keep the nuclear power plant, Vermont Yankee, open. It's going to close next year. We're seeing a lot of, well, not a lot, but we're starting to see some nuclear power plants close in Southern California and Vermont. We're seeing a lot of coal plants close. Are you concerned that we might be taking a diverse source of diversity of electrical sources and putting too much into one basket, this natural gas / renewables basket? And should that be a concern for people,
I think so.
Companies?
I think I said at the time, the last bill I signed into law 3 years ago before leaving office was to designate large-scale hydropower as renewable. So it would count toward our RPS standard, and I understand Connecticut is moving in that direction as well. And we entered into a 26-year extension of our contract with HQ. And I said at the time, I don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, even if it's a very friendly, cheap, favorable basket, because I think we need to maintain some diversification. Now, our retail utility, our largest utility, is buying some nuclear power from a New Hampshire plant now to maintain that diversity. And I hope the natural gas pipeline extension will be approved. As we heard in an earlier panel, fuel is going to move, whether it's by truck or rail or pipeline. And we just had an experience up in our part of the world, north of the border, as you know, Mr. Minister, in the little village of Lac Mégantic, Quebec, where there was a huge explosion, a devastating impact on a community from a train accident. So I hope in the end natural gas will be a greater part of our mix. And interestingly, Russell, there's a new company that just started up called NG Advantage that is trucking natural gas from a tap on the pipeline to large industrial and other users by truck, because it's more advantageous to them than the other power costs that they have. And so where the pipeline isn't, in some cases, the gas can go.
Let's turn to Minister Flaherty. You are Canada's finance minister. You're a position you've held since 2006, the longest serving finance minister in the G20 with the exception of Saudi Arabia. And as with much in energy, energy industry likes to do things large, achieve economies of scale, and I understand you're the father of triplets too, so I believe you understand about the economies of scale. Let's talk a little bit about the oil sands. These are up in Alberta, just an enormous oil resource. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that these are in far northern, well, pretty far north in Alberta, but the economic development of developing this resource is enormous. And in fact, they use these trucks to pick up the oil-soaked dirt. These trucks are absolutely enormous, about 3 stories tall, I think the largest trucks in the world. Tell me a little bit about them, because what I found fascinating is that these trucks and the jobs to build these trucks have nothing to do with Canada. It's not in Canada at all. Is that correct?
Well, they're built in Iowa, that's right. Yeah. And the trucks are a lot bigger than I am.
Yeah.
I've stood beside them. They're just huge. And the wheels are bigger than I am.
Yeah.
We, you know, in Canada, we have a third of the world's proven oil resources. And the Minister of Finance in Saudi Arabia has served longer than me, but he doesn't have to seek election. It's a little different in their system. But we do want to continue to export as we do. I mean, this is a North American market. My colleagues here from Mexico. It's an integrated market. It's particularly integrated between Canada and the United States. And to reduce that level of integration, it seems to me, would be mistaken, particularly given the fact that Canada's obviously a democracy, the rule of law, reliable, an ally, and will continue to be so over time. So and in terms of regulatory authority, what we did federally is a couple of years ago is reduce our environmental assessments to 1 assessment per project. That's it. Whether it's done at it would be the state level here, the provincial level in Canada, or whether it's done at the federal level, doesn't matter. 1 project, 1 assessment with a time limit. And that way we can get on with these projects, like the various projects in the oil sands. And by the way, more than half of the oil sands are owned by interests in the United States. Not to mention all the trucks and all the rest that happens there. Well, so this is like a joint enterprise, really, with the United States, and I am disappointed with Keystone so far. I mean, we know the State Department's assessment of the number of jobs that would be created in the United States over 2 years with Keystone is 42,000 jobs, and we know that labor unions are in favor of it. 62 senators voted in favor of it, and it concerns me. I just came back from the G20 in Russia on the weekend, and we spent a lot of time talking about other issues, but we did talk about economic issues as well, and it just challenges my imagination to understand why this wouldn't be approved in the best interests of American workers.
Well, other nations, when they're developing their oil and gas resources, insist on what they call local input. The jobs, the manufacturing, the pipes need to be created locally in order to create jobs. That's a route Canada has never taken. Make the argument, why doesn't that make sense? Because you would think if it's the country's natural resource, then they should get the jobs also. I mean,
Well, you know, we don't just export hockey players. We export we export a lot of oil, and you know, there's more oil that comes to the United States every day, 2.7 million barrels from Canada, than from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia combined. I mean, it's just not recognized as much because we're such good neighbors, so we don't go around, you know, bragging about it. But we need to talk about it a bit because this is a very good relationship with our best ally for many, many years, and we want to grow the relationship. And in terms of jobs in Canada, I mean, our unemployment rate has come down significantly, and it's a fabulous development in the oil sands. More than 1 million barrels a day of the oil that comes to the United States now comes from the oil sands, and a lot of there's lots to say about it, but there are a lot of Aboriginal people work there. It's been a tremendous development for them in northern Alberta, that they get trained to drive those big trucks. They get trained to do all sorts of jobs in the sector. And so it's a great source of jobs and wealth and quality of life improvement for people in northern Alberta.
well, let's bring in the final panelist. Jordy Herrera is the former Energy Secretary of Mexico, also the CEO of Pemex, the state-run oil company up until late last year, I believe. Yeah. So there has been, just in the last month, talk of opening up Mexico to foreign investments. Mexico has been essentially closed, and it's been run by the oil and gas exploration by Pemex since the late 1930s. Give us your sense. If this goes through, well, first of all, will it go through? What kind of impact will this have economically in Mexico? How important will this be to open up the oil and gas sector to development?
Okay, let me say first that there was this idea that Mexico was running out of oil and gas, and that's not true, and it's not true with the conventional resources, and now we are sure that it's not true for the unconventional resources. Currently, our production for the third year in a row is 2.5 million of barrels per day. I think we can see that from now till 10 years from now, because now our proven reserves are certified just like any other company. And we are realizing that we have plenty of opportunities if we get the chance to develop the unconventional resources. The International Energy Agency is saying that Mexico is one of the 5 largest reservoirs in the world. So we have tons of possibilities. The difference would be how to get the money, the amount of money that we need to develop those resources. At the end, it's not that Mexico ran out of oil. We ran out of public money. And you cannot increase taxes to poor people. 50 million of Mexicans are poor people, to get a rich public company to produce oil. It won't make sense, and it's not going to be enough. We have to develop in the conventional industry, we have to develop deep water drilling. We have just explored less than 20% of our own resources at sea in the Gulf of Mexico. And we're just learning, let me put it that way, how to deal with unconventional resources. The fact is that the President Calderon administration realized that the model need a huge change. We start that change at the middle of the administration, all because shale gas. That explains why we are asking American companies to export the gas, not to Pemex, to the Mexican companies established in our country. Most of them are for international exports. All the NAFTA capabilities that gave us are very useful if we have gas. So I think that this is the last chance for a country like ours to grow faster, to make enough room for new jobs. We're losing so many people because they have to find a job elsewhere. And I think if the Congress gets the right legal model to develop unconventional resources and deep water opportunities, I think we can see a brighter Mexico in a few years to come.
Will there be a shale boom? I mean, is the conditions right? And in particular, will the development of shale be accepted in Mexico? Because it can be a very intrusive business.
At the end, it's the best solution, because if you look at the numbers, Pemex is spending more or less like $20 billion to produce those 2.5 million of barrels per day. We could increase easily that production up to perhaps 4.5 million of barrels per day. But the key question is, with which kind of money do we want to use, public or private money, and how fast do we want to develop those resources? I mean, we could say that we can stay at 2.5 million of barrels. It's not a matter of needs of energy for the country. It's a matter of money to be used in different other areas. It could be infrastructure, could be education, could be so many areas that we need that oil money. But at the end, the key issue with the Congress is to let them understand that we are in a hurry. Otherwise, the other economies are going to gain competitiveness. We are losing a lot of jobs with China or India. And now those jobs could go up north to the same region. And that could be a huge mistake for
So to protect your industrial base, manufacturing base, you want to get access to...
And you can see that clearly in terms of Detroit and the new facilities that are in Mexico in terms for the automotive industry. They came to Mexico because we are very competitive. But if we don't have enough gas, or if our cost of production because our feedstock is too high, they're going to move elsewhere. With the same velocity that they came to the country, they could go. So I think I'm pretty convinced that this is last chance for us. We have to do our own job. It's not going to be just like in the United States in terms of the legal framework. We have our own history, and let me put it that way, we have to learn more about democracy yet. But at the end, I think there's going to be a new model that will allow private money to be invested in Mexico. Could be through JVs with Pemex, or maybe in some specific areas, some kind of product sharing contracts. The President Peña Nieto is asking for contracts, not product sharing, but profit sharing contracts. That could work out, but at the end, Mexico now has the opportunity to grow faster and with the amount of job creation that we really need. We should be growing in rates of above 6%, and for the past perhaps 5 to 7 years, it was below 2%. So I think with this, we can help out in terms of energy security regionally, but we have to work inside the house first to get this possible.
Governor Herrera, you haven't been shy about, and you made this point earlier, that you feel that the state is an appropriate level to be able to regulate and manage. What about, there's been some controversies recently about when local townships, local governments want to ban fracking or control their destiny. And the flip side of that, I've seen some fascinating regulations come out of local governments about noise walls and what times of day operations can go on. What's the appropriate level? What's the appropriate level of government? Who should be involved in regulating this, if any?
Yeah, there should be input obviously from the local individuals, but when you have 254 counties, as Texas does, and you're an oil and gas industry, and you're going to have 254 different patchwork regulations, that obviously is not going to work. I think most states and most townships and counties and cities will find that equitable solution to that. And the idea that Washington, D.C. can tell all 50 states how best to do everything, The same is true, you know, what's good for the goose is also good for the gander, so to speak. And so Texas trying to tell all 254 counties, here's exactly how you're going to do it. Allow them some flexibility, allow them some decision-making process. Let me go back to something that Herrera said that I think is really important for us as a state and as a country to grasp. If Mexico, and I hope with all my heart that PMEX and the Mexican government does in fact grasp on to allowing the private sector investment, not because there's a lot of Texans that are going to go down there and profit. There probably will be some good companies from Texas that can partner and help extract. But building the Mexican economy through their natural resources, I don't think there is anything more important to North America's strategic security, along with the Keystone Pipeline being built out. Those are the two things that I will suggest to you that can put America, and Mr. President, I want to tell you and say thank you for putting this together today. I think this is the start of the discussion to create a North American energy policy that can change the future of the world. And Mexico is going to be at the epicenter of that. And, you know, we have this great discussion and debate raging on in America today about immigration. When this happens, the immigration policy that they're discussing today goes away. And I cannot tell you how important it is for Mexico to be able to have the ability to help the people in their country and using those energy resources as the basis for that. So those two things, the XL pipeline and the development of the energy resources in Mexico, are two of the most important issues that we face as a world. And the future of North America and the security of North America is inextricably intertwined between our great friends in Canada and our friends in Mexico. And so it's very important for us to focus on that and get it right.
Well, it's fascinating to hear you talk about a North American energy policy. I want to follow up on that. Clearly, one thing you're talking about is integration, pipeline integration, bringing the countries closer together. What else would that mean? Give me a sense of what you think a North American energy policy would look like. What are
well, obviously,
we
have some interchanges between Mexico and Texas that we have worked on through the years.
This is a power grid you're talking about, correct?
Yes, not just power.
But not just power, the pipelines as well. And that's one of the ones that we can work on and to speed those processes up. Again, the federal government does have a role here. And you know, sometimes people think I don't like the federal government. I just like it to be small. But they do have a very important role of doing these types of multilateral decisions and contracts and policy decisions that are made. But we need to, like Canada, I think you're so smart to be able to have those rules in place that say one evaluation per project. Speeding up these regulations, speeding up decisions. One of the things that states compete against each other. Mm-hmm. And if you want to take...
You foster that competition, I've noticed. I've seen some of those advertisements.
Governor O'Malley is excited that I'm coming up to Maryland this next week to talk about competition.
Go on.
But the idea that we have this ability to move very quickly into making these decisions about pipelines, and Terry and I are going to be speaking about some of those between Texas and Mexico very quickly. But the pipeline across Kansas, there were some real questions about it, and there needed to be some arbitration. There needed to be, and a federal government can and should play a role, but they do not need to be the final arbiter when it comes to slowing up a process for political purposes. And we see that all too often rather than solutions to problems that, you know, frankly, the government just getting in the way.
You know, if I could jump in on this North American energy grid, I worked with the president's dad. I was a lowly White House fellow at the time, but at the U.S. Trade Rep's office when we started the NAFTA negotiations. Mm-hmm. And the whole concept behind NAFTA was really a very growth-oriented policy for everybody. This is for the United States, but it's for Mexico and it's for Canada, and that everybody would be better off that we did that. And things are moving forward, but here's, I think, really a beautiful step for us to be competitive globally, and more so. As we're getting manufacturing coming back to the United States, but we need it based upon that we can be more competitive than any place else, and energy is a big piece of that. So I would hope that those are the sort of things that could move forward more aggressively. In oil and gas, electricity, obviously Vermont and Quebec, you don't want all of it to come from Quebec. You want some Kansas wind out there probably. But
we'll talk.
Yeah, we can do that. but those are the things I think that you have to grow faster now for us to be more competitive and get jobs going here in North America. And I'm looking particularly in the United States and Kansas, but I think if we can get the whole pie growing here, we'll be much better off.
But to develop jobs requires building power lines. It requires drilling a very large number of oil and gas wells. And there's been a very large backlash against pipelines, against power lines, and against hydraulic fracturing, right or wrong. And I don't, we can certainly get into whether you feel that the backlash and the criticisms are valid or not, but what I'm wondering is, what's the role of the government to get in there and to try to prevent that backlash, prevent this economic development and this energy development from coming to a halt, whether it's through lawsuits or community opposition? I'm wondering, Governor Douglas.
Also, I think, as I suggested earlier, it's the responsibility of governors in particular and governments in general to seek balance, to weigh all of the factors that are in play here, not just energy in a narrow silo, but the economic impact of the decisions, such as the ones I mentioned in Vermont. Our legislature last session voted, along with New York State, to ban fracking. Well, all the analyses I've seen suggest that there are no accessible deposits of oil or gas anywhere in our state. Bold statement. Next, they're going to ban citrus groves or something. I don't know. But we need to get past the ideology and be practical and understand the impacts of various decisions. I think we also have to understand that nothing is impact-free. We went through a great debate in our state to build some larger, higher, more obtrusive transmission lines a few years ago, but you know, in the New England grid, there were a couple of weak spots, and some were in Vermont, and ultimately we had to persuade landowners and local communities to allow those in order to get the power through. So you know, pick your poison, I say to folks. I mean, there's no source of power that is completely without some adverse impact, even wind turbines. And I'd rather have them in Kansas and Texas than on our pristine ridge lines, frankly. But they, you know, they kill wildlife. They require clear cutting of our forested hills to build roads to get up there. I mean, everything has a...
We've got to clear cut our forest.
Yeah, right.
How do you notice?
We appreciate trees one at a time.
Yeah. We'll trade some biomass for your wind.
Well, I'm wondering whether if there's an appropriate level of sensible environmental regulations, whether you feel you can win back the trust of the public. I mean, not all the public, obviously, but that portion of the public that could potentially derail this. And I'm wondering...
Excuse me. It already happened in deep water drilling. Mm-hmm. After the accident in the Gulf of Mexico, there was this governmental table to discuss how to deal with drilling in deep water and ultra deep water.
Absolutely.
Mexico came to the table, and we are setting same standards. It won't matter which part of the Gulf of Mexico you are. The only missing key is Cuba. But we can talk with Cuba so they won't spoil the resources in the area. So at the end, I think, yes, it's needed in terms of to create common policies, common regulation, so it's easier to understand the economics of the system, because the oil that comes out from the south part of the Gulf of Mexico goes up to Houston, let me put it that way, or from up Alberta down to Texas area. That's going to happen. So it's useful to have the same principles in terms of legal framework and principles, because the systems are way different, and could be useful to have the same principles in terms of regulation and setting common standards in terms of environmental issues, in terms of security for industrial high-risk process. And that's possible. It already happened in deep water.
So you feel that the response to the Deepwater Horizon, the rules, that helped reestablish confidence, and that sort of could be a model going forward?
Yeah, for sure.
For deepwater drilling. Let me try to bring in Minister Flaherty again. How do you foster an investment climate with so many different competing interests? Because it seems to me in Canada, as in the United States and Mexico, there are many different interests out there. So how do you try to incentivize and create that climate where people want to invest? Because these are high-risk investments.
Lower taxes.
That simple?
Which is what we did. Our federal tax rate now is 15%. When we started 7.5 years ago, it was 22.5%. Now the provinces also have some taxes. We got them to reduce them too by the usual method of offering them monetary incentives. So that seemed to work, as it usually does. So that helps. And we got rid of capital taxes, that sort of thing. But on your point about environmental assessments, I repeat what I said before: one project, one review. But people want environmental assessments. There's no question about that. Yes. So it's right to do them. And I'm all for that. But you have to have time limits because businesses need predictability and certainty in terms of investment. So we try to do both. And
you mentioned a time limit before, correct? I mean, yes. What is that? Is a certain number of days to complete the assessment?
Yeah, and make sure it's done within a year. That's the idea, so that the businesses can know. And even if the answer is no on a particular project, at least the investors are entitled to certainty.
So your point is that the public often demands and deserves that kind of environmental assessment, but on the same time, it needs to be done quickly, or at least have some sort of certainty when you're going to get a decision, and to have a single entity rather than 5 or 6 different entities all make those.
That's right, and often, as you know, the process takes over, and it's no longer about the merits of a particular project or application. It's more about a bunch of people sitting around a room and having hearings for years and appeals and so on. So we need to have some definition, which we've done.
Well, and it's sort of interesting because I know the Keystone XL pipeline has been mentioned a couple of times, but one of the things that's interesting there is that we don't know the timetable on that, whether it's yes or no. You just mentioned sometimes it's better to get the no if it's going to be a no, but there really is no timetable.
Well, in the Canadian situation, as I said earlier, we have 1/3 of the known oil resources in the world. A good part of that is in the oil sands. If we don't export it via the Keystone pipeline or whatever, well, you have to export it because I have an obligation, as the governors do and so on, to create jobs and make sure there are economic opportunities for people. So it's going to get exported. We'll either, if we don't do it that way, we'll do it through the West Coast, through British Columbia, or we'll do it through the East Coast, through the Atlantic provinces, or we'll do it through Churchill, Manitoba, through Hudson Bay. But it will get exported because we have to make sure that we have economic growth.
Governor Brownback, let's bring you back in. So I wanted to talk a little bit. You've been very pro-business. You also cut income tax, if I'm not mistaken, in your state. What's your thinking?
More than Texas.
Excuse me?
More than Texas.
I'm going to stay out of this.
And we're at 0 on LLC and sub-S pass-through income. So that's the target. That's how most small business is organized. And so we said we want to particularly grow small business, and so we were at 0 on that. Now we got our income tax rates down, so we're not as low as Texas on our income tax rates, but we are on LLCs and sub-S. And the beauty of it is this is competition of the states, and we should do this as a way of being able to grow as a country.
But in terms of encouraging energy development in particular, is it as simple as that? Is it as simple as getting the right tax structure, a low tax structure, or is there something more that needs to be done as the governor?
No, it's not as simple as that, but I think that's why the Canadians cut their tax rates, because this tends to work. Nationally, we ought to be at a flat tax, and we ought to get the tax on capital way down, and we certainly shouldn't be taxing repatriated capital I mean, right now, I don't even remember what the rate is, but it's some huge rate, 35% if you're going to repatriate capital. And here's $1 trillion, probably more, that sits overseas, that's waiting to come home and invest in America, and we won't let it because it's so taxed. We did a 1 year, 5%, what was it, 5% that we cut that rate to, and we brought in billions to the federal treasury off of that 1 year and brought in trillion, probably, to U.S. capital into the capital markets in the United States. Well, I mean, this is a clear one where taxes is the issue. Now, for us, it's more than that. You've got to maintain a robust workforce, and we're doing a lot on technical education. You've got to have a good highway structure. I mean, there's a multiple set of things, but taxes is a big one.
Governor Perry, do you want to weigh in on that? Besides taxes, or in addition to taxes, how do you encourage energy development and economic growth? How do you do that?
I think it is rather simple, actually. It's a tax policy. It's a regulatory climate. It's a legal system that doesn't allow for oversuing. And then it is investing in accountable public schools so that there is a skilled workforce. And that is simply how it works. The difficult part is finding men and women who are courageous enough to legislate those through. And I'll give you a good example. Bobby Jindal, this last year, was going to lower his income taxes.
Governor of Louisiana.
Governor of Louisiana to 0. Now, let me tell you, that made me nervous. When Bobby's talking about lowering his personal income tax rate to 0, and they are on the western seaboard the eastern seaboard of Texas, they are going to be a handful economically. Now, he wasn't successful in doing that because he couldn't find enough courageous men and women in their legislature who was willing to do that. Mr. President, you and the legislators in Texas started tort reform, and I believe in 1995. We added to it in 2003. We passed loser pay in 2011, and when we kept setting the bar a little higher because guys like Sam are going to come along and he's going to take the challenge. Bobby's going to continue to push the Louisiana legislature. Mary Fallon, I can promise you, is sitting up in Oklahoma today thinking about how she can make her state more competitive with Texas. Susana Martinez over in New Mexico is a handful when it comes to the film industry and the incentives that they have. So it puts us in the CEO positions of our states in uncomfortable positions, but that's the beauty of competition. So it's those 4 legs of the stool: taxes, regulations, legal system, and a skilled workforce that you must have. And once you have those into place, then people will decide where they're going to live. And I'm a huge believer that the folks in Vermont, if they want to live in that arrangement that they have, where they have the high taxes, or if you want to live in Maryland with those high taxes, you know, that you ought to be free to do that. Or
what you've got developing the country, and I think this is really a fascinating lesson for the country, is you've got a red state and a blue state model that are really developing, and you're seeing these aggressively be pursued. And the interesting thing is you change America by changing states, not by changing Washington. My example now is Ronald Reagan campaigned a lot about welfare reform, and he talked about it, never got it done. It wasn't until Michigan and Wisconsin did welfare reform that it migrated to Washington. And you're seeing now the country saying there's a red state model, there's a blue state model, lower taxes model, less government, a higher taxes, more government model. Let's see how this goes. Let's see how this plays out. And I really think the red state model is the one that's going to win.
I agree with my colleagues, Russell, and I have to point out that some of those taxes were imposed over my veto 4 years ago. But I tried. But what I hear from Vermonters is it's just expensive to live here. And I think that's to your point, Rick, that if folks can find a place where they can get a decent job, not a huge paying job, but a decent one to feed their families, a place to live that's affordable, and other services that are available in their communities, that's where they'll go and want to stay. And energy is a factor in our part of the country where it's quite expensive in the Northeast, but there are the other issues that you mentioned as well.
But I wanted to get back, just to steer us back to energy for 1 second, because we are in this period of great flux. A lot of changes going on. in terms of energy development, where we're getting our electricity from. Is there any role, you mentioned a North American energy policy, but is there any role that either the federal or the state government needs to have to guide energy development going forward? Or is it just a matter of setting the right conditions, setting a low, simple regulatory framework? Or does there need to be a little bit more attempt at a foresight or policy that says, well, we want to have some nuclear. We don't want coal to go away completely. I'm just sort of curious as to what, if any, role any of you see in terms of setting that forward vision, saying this is where we should be in 10 years, let's go get there, because we do have this energy revolution going on. There's so much changing.
We do long-range energy planning. I see it as a partnership between our state utility planners and the private utilities. When we entered into those long-term contracts, I say we, but it was the retail utilities that signed the contract with Hydro-Quebec, but the Premier of Quebec and I were nudging and involved in those discussions. So I think there is an important role there. This is somewhat heretical, but sometimes the federal government may have a role, and I'll give you one example. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, because of its preemptive power that was recognized by federal courts, allowed us to keep our nuclear plant running a few more years when the state was trying to shut it down. So, so sometimes they can be a good partner too.
You know, I think a national flat tax would really help energy.
How so?
It helps everything.
Because government really steps in and tries to manipulate a lot of things. And we've benefited off of the production tax credit. State of Kansas has this. This has gotten this up and going. But I tell you, if you were at a point now, if you just had a one flat rate and you back the government out of the manipulation that's in the tax code, which is replete throughout the tax code, that would help the energy process.
I totally agree with Sam. A flat tax, you know, just think about the associated cost that you spend in your company every year in the preparations of those taxes, the lawyers, the accountants, this monstrous amount of money, not to mention the quality of life that on independent individuals that have to deal with the IRS. And, you know, that's not even counting the ones that are investigating you right now.
Gonna leave that one alone, aren't you? Yeah.
Mr. Flaherty, any thoughts on a North American energy policy going forward?
I don't investigate anybody.
No. Different kind of policy.
But people think I do. They always answer my phone calls, I know.
Well, you're the boss of them, right? But any broad thoughts on terms of policies? Should there be more coordination in terms of infrastructure or development to make sure that the promise of this North American energy boom really comes to fruition?
No, I think so. I think, you know, all of the three of us who are partners in NAFTA need to participate together in making sure that we have the network together, including hydro lines and so on. Like right now, we're putting a hydro line underneath Lake Champlain, and we're going to supply, Hydro-Quebec will supply 10% of the electricity to New York City. You know, and these are things that need to be done. We got to be realistic about growth and providing adequate energy for people. And the same thing, we're building a hydro line into New Hampshire right now. These things need to be done, and so I'm all for environmental assessments, but I think we have to be pragmatic and make sure that there's economic progress and job creation.
That balance, it's always strike that balance. Okay.
And it's already happening again. If you look at California, and they're asking for a specific percentage of the power production coming from renewable energy, a great percentage of that renewable energy is going to come from Mexico. But we cannot allow that investment go through Mexico because we don't have the right infrastructure. It's the same system. It's interconnected every day for many technical reasons. So at the end, we have to plan together how to develop those new requirements of infrastructure so we can get more efficient systems. It's happening in power, and it's happening again here in Texas with pipelines and natural gas.
Well, I'm up here because we're coming to a close. Thank you so much, Russell, and what a fabulous panel. Thank you, governors.
Thank you, Russell.
Ministers, former governors. So stay seated just for a second. 3.5 years ago, we gathered just down the street at SMU for our first energy conference at the recommendation of President Bush. And at that time, the reason for it was the impact of the shale gas revolution was just being felt. And I think that the idea of a North American energy boom, we just heard that phrase, was something that I think very few of us really understood. So 3 quick points about innovation, policy, and growth. Ken Hirsch said, the ingenuity that happened in the private sector has really been stunning, and we've heard that repeated over and over today. George Mitchell, whose name has come up a few times, a triumph of the unleashed human imagination, and that's what the Bush Institute is all about, the freedom to create and to create the economic forces that will help us grow. But the lesson today is that innovation would have no effect if it were not for good public policy. As Governor Perry compared Texas and California, as far as resources are concerned, they're probably equal. Maybe California has more. But it's public policy that allows that unleashing of the imagination. The consensus today that we heard is certainly not to remove or end all regulation, but to make them sensible, to make them fair, and one of the things we heard a lot about was to make them reliable and consistent so the businesses know what they're getting. And also, and we heard it on this panel, we heard it on one of the earlier panels, to move decisions more from the federal to the state level. And just to bring us back to where we started, energy regulation for growth. That's why we're here. It's because of the 4% growth project. And North Dakota and Texas are among the states that are growing at more than 4%. And the reason is not simply that they're blessed with great natural resources. No, it is policy. We looked at taxes, we looked at immigration, now we're looking at energy policy. Amity, come up here for 1 second if you don't mind. I just want to thank a bunch of people, and I want to start with Amity Schlades, who's been kind of quiet, and it's hard to find you. There you are. So Amity Schlades, who heads the 4% Growth Project, and we're so proud to have her here, and her incredible team. You can recite who's on your team in a second, but I want to thank also our sponsors, Pioneer Natural Resources, the Hirsch Foundation, Highland Capital Management, NRG Energy, and the Bush, the unbelievable, incredible, I've never seen anything like it over the last 4 years, Bush events team, in this case headed by April Zorsky, who ran this conference, and Amity Schlades.
Thank you. Thank you, President Bush. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Governor Perry. Thank you, guests. I'm going to just briefly look under the hood of this conference to mention some names of people who worked so hard on it. Our SMU partners, Bud Weinstein, who produced the booklet today. I saw in the proximity of the president. Professor Bullock, the PERC team led by Dino Falaschetti, who provided a number of scholars who are posting items on our website, and we're thinking maybe putting together a book there. Our media arm, led by Sally McDonough, Hannah Abney, and also helping us out is Robert Asahina, who edited a lot of these papers. The development team, especially Ann Davies, who found us sponsors, and our own team, along with Jim, who came in and was our managing editor, our MC. Mackerstall, who you got to know, Mike McMahon, who's not on our team but helped write this conference in the beginning, Matt Denhart, and Rebecca Sears. Thank you very much for coming today. Right?
Thank you. So the last thing I'm going to say. So the last thing I'm going to say is that guests are invited. I mean, the audience is invited. It says guests here. Okay, guests are invited to reception in the hallway outside the auditorium, and also you are also invited to take tours of the just absolutely incredible museum. We blocked some time, so feel free to to look at the look at the great museum. And thank you very much. It's been a great day. Thank you all on the panel and everybody who participated.